Say, welcome to the third lecture of NSCI, I think. We're going to be talking about competition today. So there's going to be five main parts of this lecture. First is going to be types of counterplans to go for competition against. Second is going to be the different types of competition. Third is going to be functional competition. Fourth is textual competition. And finally is functional and textual competition. So types of counterplans to go for competition against. In my opinion, like any counterplan that has an internal net benefit or would probably result in the AF, you should go for some sort of perm in the 2AR. So that means that all process counterplans, all like word picks, or all like agent counterplans with internal net benefits, like for example, the DOS counterplan with a net benefit of diplomacy good, are counterplans that you should go for competition for. I think there's a couple reasons for why competition is so strong, but especially if you're a school that's small or isn't like organized and doesn't do a lot of prep, it's extremely helpful because it can like level the playing field between you and a couple like bigger schools like the MBAs, GBNs of the world. And like this is demonstrated like when or last year, I wouldn't recommend this, but I wouldn't like prep out any counterplan that had like an internal benefit. I would only go for competition against them because I knew that I could win. So that like drastically reduces the prep burden on you, and that means that you can like spend your time prepping out other stuff, and you can save a lot of time with a bunch of counterplans. Especially this year, where basically or where a lot of disads are non-unique because of all the security cooperation that the U.S. already does with NATO, and like especially like given like the recent stuff with Ukraine. I think that a bunch of people will gravitate towards counterplans with internal net benefits. So being able to go for competition not only means that you'll be able to like obviate all of those pretty easily, but that also means like when you're neg, you can like go for those counterplans and you can run a lot cheatier counterplans and you can still win because you'll be able to win on competition. Um, so next is types of competition. So before I get into types, it's helpful to like understand what is competition. The way that I frame it is it's basically like the link in a disad. It asks whether the plan can be done in conjunction with the counter plan or why the plan would trade off with the ability to do the counter plan. So perms test the link, i.e. they see if you can do both the plan and the counter plan or some like combination of the plan and the counter plan together in some capacity in order to solve whatever the net benefit of the counter plan is. So there's two major types, or there's two like large types of counterplan competition, in my opinion. There's positional and there's textual. So positional is that a counterplan is competitive if it excludes a position of the affirmative and has a net benefit based off of that exclusion. So that naturally leads to the question of what is a position of the affirmative. This is pretty arbitrary in my opinion, and one of the main weaknesses of positional competition, because people can basically define it as whatever they want. Some people define it as like cross-ex. For example, if you, um, if they ask you in cross-ex who's the agent of the affirmative, and you say the courts, then that means that a Congress counterplan is competitive. Some people define it as like 1AC tags. So if like you say the plan enacts a zero organism standard or something, then that means that picks out of like specific organisms are competitive. And some people say that it's like any word in the 1AC. So, and some people say it's like anything that the affirmative will probably result in. For example, normal means of the counterplan, which results in like counterplans like the recycled paper counterplan, which is that normal means of new legislation is that it goes through and is written on like new paper. So we should write it on like recycled paper instead. So that seems like pretty bad because people can like make a bunch of different counterplans competitive off of a bunch of different things. And it basically, because of this arbitrariness, it basically always devolves just down into like any word you're wanting to see, we can get competition based off of. So people seeing this made a subset of positional competition called functional competition. Functional competition is that counterplans need to exclude a function of the affirmative and have a net benefit off that. And then a function is defined as a part of the plan. So for example, when you're reading a process counterplan, you say that it's functionally competitive because it picks out of the word like resolved and should that indicate immediacy and certainty. That's like positional with a subset of functional. The second large type of competition is textual. Textual competition says that a counterplan is competitive if it excludes some text of the plan and then has a net benefit based off of that exclusion. So there's a couple net benefits to textual competition. One of them is that it's like super elegant and it's not like judge intervention-y because you can like always see whether the counterplan and plan can be like combined, or the text of the counterplan and plan can be combined in a way to resolve the net benefit. But other than that, it allows for things like word picks, which is like picks out of like the word substantially or like other like things in the plan text. So it's pretty bad. And we'll get into like debating like the different types of competitions in a sec. But there's a couple more forms of competition. I'll get to it at the end of the lecture if I have time. First is philosophical competition, which basically says like we get to get rid of some philosophical commitment of the one you see. And then second is scalar competition, which is kind of a misnomer in my opinion. But that basically says like we get to test. It's used against chaos so that you can get like disads against chaos. It's saying that we get to test like the affirmative at like multiple scales, like you get to scale it up. So first with functional competition, there's there's like four terms that I think are pretty important for functional competition. First is the all other instances perm. So the all other instances perm is used against counterplans that are like broad blanket sweeping statements. For example, for the ban NATO counterplan, which is basically like the US should stop all security cooperation with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and then they have a net benefit off of NATO being bad, and eliminating security cooperation with NATO would stop like NATO from existing. And then they have like a bunch of like net benefits of like NATO is gonna like trigger Russia to like start a war, and then that'll escalate whatever. So their answer to perm do the counterplan is that that's obviously nonsense. You increase security cooperation, we eliminate it. And their answer to perm do both is that that's also illogical. You can't eliminate it while increasing it at the same time. So the all other instances perm says you should do the plan, and in all other instances, you should cease security cooperation with NATO. So for example, what that would look like is if you're running the OCO's affirmative, or like we should create like unified posture on offensive cyber operations. That would basically be like the only area in which NATO would still be around is to talk about offensive cyber operations and to have like a unified posture against that. And then in all other instances, we see security cooperation with NATO. The net benefit of that is that you say that the affirmative is going to happen, or the affirmative is like key to solve whatever your impacts are, and the perm solves like the majority of the net benefit for why NATO is bad. So this is a pretty threatening perm if you're reading like the ban NATO counterplan. So there's a couple responses. First, that it's intrinsic, i.e., it adds like exceptions that aren't there in the plan or the counterplan. In my opinion, this is like a pretty bad argument. And I think I think what you say is that no, it's not intrinsic. We do all of the plan and parts of the counterplan. If like adding an exception is intrinsic, then that means that any counterplan can compete by just adding ban the plan plank. For example, if it's like we should colonize space and not do the plan, and then you say perm do the af and the first part of that, then that would also be intrinsic according to them because it adds an exception to the counterplan. So I think that's a pretty bad model of debate. Yeah, so that's used against like broad sweeping counterplans. The next is perm do the plan through the process of the counterplan. So this, in my opinion, is probably like the second best perm against most process counterplans, and it is the best perm against process counterplans that have an external benefit. For example, if you have like the regneg counterplan, which is basically like we should consult with a bunch of like stakeholders about the plan and then do it. And then the net benefit is that it takes time, so it avoids the politics disadvantage that it like saps up Biden's PC. This is pretty good because it still results in the affirmative. So what the perm is, or I call it the process perm. So what the process perm is that basically it says that we'll do the process of the counterplan, and then we'll implement the results of the plan. For example, this kind of got brought up with the lie perm. Some time ago, people like kept reading a bunch of process counterplans that were just like, we should consult NATO or consult like Japan or some other ally. So what the perm said is like, sure, we should consult Japan, NATO, whatever. And then after the consultation is done, we will fiat that the af gets passed. So what that does is like the negative normally makes a bunch of say yes arguments or reasons for why the plan would get implemented as a result of the counterplan, because it would be in order to like solve the impacts of the af. But then the trick that they normally say is that it's not certain, i.e., we think that there's a high chance that it'll get passed, but it's not certain. So therefore, like words like should that mean certain, won't are like reasons for why the counterplan is competitive. So what this does is it says, no, we still have the certainty happen, but we'll concede that they'll most probably say yes, and then we'll implement the AF immediately after. Or for like the NGA counterplan, it'd be like perm do the plan, or perm do the plan as the process of the counterplan would look like the NGA going bargaining with the federal government, saying we're not going to do any of your federal initiatives unless you put the plan into action, and then the federal government putting the plan into action because that's what the AF fiats, but and then that's the like process of the counterplan that gets fiated. So in order to win this, you need to win that plans can don't have to be immediate. In my opinion, that's not that hard. I think like the mistake that most people do in like a lot of these competition debates that are like reliant on cards is that rather than like actually examining the card, they just like take it like for granted. For example, if like definitions say like, or if the tags is like should is certain, and then they have like a couple words highlighted, people just like take that and say like, yeah, sure, the card says that should is certain. But a lot of these cards like don't actually say that. The probably the biggest example of that is the Summers 94 card. So this is the card that most people read for should means immediate. The Summers card is not a definition that says that should means immediate. It's like a part of a dictionary that is defining a bunch of different terms, and then one of the parts says that should means must, and then the part after that says that in presente means immediate, but it never says that like should means in presente or should means immediate. Similarly, I think it's like a Webster's dictionary card or like an Oxford card or something, and it says like resolved, or they people tag it to say like resolved equals immediate, but then the actual card like says resolved is opposed to immediate. So like I think a really big thing in these debates is like reading the cards that people present and like seeing if it actually says that like the plan is immediate. Another thing I would do is like, so there's two parts of weighting a definition. First is predictability and second is debatability. So this is very similar to a cheat debate. Predictability is saying like whether the definition is predictable. So most people like take like dictionaries, court cases, etc., to be super predictable. And then if it's like a random guy on a blog, then it's not predictable. Second, and people do like the predictability debate well. For the most part, they say like our definition is better because it's from like the Court of Appeals, while yours is from like a Minnesota court or whatever. But the second part that can really make you win is the debatability part. If you win, that like should being immediate is really bad for debatability, i.e., if should is immediate, then that means that like nearly infinite process counterplans compete with like a bunch of different net benefits that we can't predict, which makes it impossible to be affirmative. Or if you're neg and you say like should not be immediate is horrible because then that means that affirmatives can like delay their plans to be however late they want, then those are both pretty compelling cases for why should or should not be immediate. Uh, oh, by the way, if you're affirmative, I think that the way to solve this is by saying that normal means is immediate, but it's not mandated by the AF. So like you don't get competition off of normal means, you only get competition on mandates, but then it's still certain, it's still immediate for stuff like disads, stuff like that. So the next perm is perm due to counterplan. So this is also so perm due to counterplan versus cross counterplans. So this is, in my opinion, a worse version of perm due the or worse version of the process perm, because in order to win perm due the counterplan, you both need to win the immediacy and the certainty definitions. For example, if we go back to like the consult counterplan, if you say perm to the counterplan, they'll be like, no, you sever out of immediacy because like words like certain or words like should, resolved, etc., all mean that the plan needs to be immediate. But those words also indicate that the plan have to be certain. So the counterplan might not result in the plan. So you're severing out of like the certainty that's mandated by the resolution and by the plan. Certainty definitions are a bit more difficult in my opinion. I think that they still are pretty AF leaning, but I think that if you have a choice, you should just go for the process perm because the process perm is easier to win and you have like less to lose. So for both of the perms above, I think that whether you're AF or neg, you should always make a framing issue. So for let's say the process perm immediacy, you should be like on the affirmative, you should be like, if we win, one word means in the future, then that means that the entire resolution is in the future. So for example, if I say, I am going to get McDonald's immediately, then that would be immediate. But if you say, I'm going to get McDonald's immediately after Archon finishes his lecture, then that would not be immediate. So winning that one word in the plan is not immediate means that the entire sentence is not immediate. So what this does is that it like drastically reduces the threshold of you winning, because then that means that you only need to win one of like all the definitions that they read. While in order for the neg to win, they need to win every single definition that they read. So it like reduces your like barrier to winning a lot. Conversely, on the negative, you should say the opposite. You should say if we win that one word in the plan is immediate, then the entire rest of the sentence is immediate. Proven by like I don't know, if you say like I will or I will go to like the gym, then that might not be immediate, it might be immediate. But if you say I will go to the gym immediately, then that means it's immediate. The next perm and the final perm for functional competition is permuted counterplan versus word picks. So this is basically the only time that you'll actually need to win that you should prefer functional competition over textual competition, because the rest of it is all winning, or the rest of it most people like take for granted that functional competition is good and that's where they get most of their competition arguments off of. But this is the only time where people defend like pure textual competition and not like some combination of like textual and functional competition. So there's a couple args that I think that are good for why functional competition is better than textual competition. First is that functional competition is what policymakers actually use. For example, if you're like writing legislation and you're talking about like the effects of the plan, you're not going to be like, oh wait, let's take out X word because that'll like change like how much ink we're using or whatever, or like we can't like combine them because like the words don't fit together. You're going to say we can't combine them because their functions would be net worse if we combine them, or something like that. Second is that text only leads to Scrabble perms. So Scrabble perms are a perm. So textual competition says like you should combine words of the counterplan text and the plan text. Scrabble perms are basically like scrabbling the words around, like shifting it up in order to make it say something that it never said before for either the counterplan or the plan. So that means that like it'll be net worse because then that means that you can just like have like some tricks before the 1EC and like devise like a really sneaky plain text. And then all the perms like has a net benefit of like doing space call or something like really whack like that. So it will never be predictable and it'll always outweigh the net benefit. And then finally, it's just like word picks bad. So a lot of the time, theory and competition like intersect a lot. So this is one of the cases. I think that this probably one of the strongest cases for why textual competition alone is bad is because it allows like a bunch of word picks which are bad. Like they can pick out of the word substantially, or they can pick out of the word the in front of USFG, or the word the in front of NATO in this topic. So I think that those are probably the best reasons for why functional competition alone is better than textual competition. And then also you'll need, if you're reading a process counter plan or some other counter plan that's like functionally competitive, but probably not textually competitive. So basically any counter plan with an internal benefit, you need to defend that functional competition alone is better than textual and functional competition combined. So I think there's, again, three main reasons for what you should say. First is Scrabble perms. It's the same thing as above. Second, I think is pretty interesting. It's that AF ground is guaranteed because because the counter plan is forced to be distinct from the affirmative under functional competition, which means that you'll always have something to like make deficits to. You'll always have something to impact turn or something like that in order to always be able to say something. And finally, I think that the most underutilized tool in these kinds of debates, and this is the like argument we normally go for, is that just process counterplans are good and they limit that out. Like you'll be like all disads are like non-unique on this topic. We need internal net benefits in order to like win debates. They get rid of all internal net benefits because they'll always be able to just like beat it with a textual perm. And then you'll just be able to basically go for theory as a reason for why your model of debate is good. And most people don't know how to answer that. Obviously, if you're affirmative, what you want to say is that we don't limit out all process counterplans. We just limit out process counterplans that like aren't germane to the app. And we'll get to that in a second. But that's like, I think, a really compelling argument for why functional competition alone is probably pretty good. So the next part is textual competition. So textual competition alone is normally not used by people. There's only two instances in which I think that textual competition are widely used. First is word picks. So we talked about that before, or from like the water topic, the resources pick. So the resolution was like the USFG should substantially increase its protection of water resources in the United States. So teams would be like the USFG should substantially increase its protection of water in the United States, and then whatever the AFS plan text was. And then it had a net benefit of just being like framing water as a resource is bad and like managerialist. So in order to win that the counterplan was competitive, you needed to win that textual competition alone was better than textual and functional competition, because there's no way that, or well, there's like some like arguments that aren't very good why it's function competitive, but for the most part, they like relied on functional competition to be bad in order to win that their counterplan is competitive. The second type of counterplan that I've seen is like artificial disads. So like the space elevators counterplan is like a counterplan that Whitney Young ran in like the finals of the TOC in 2019, I think. So it basically said, so the resolution that year was the United States federal government should substantially decrease its arms sales and foreign military sales and direct commercial sales or something like that. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but the gist of it is that basically you needed to decrease arms sales. So what Whitney Young did is that they said that we should tether the funding of space elevators, which are basically like these things that allow you to like go into space for relatively cheap, to the sale of, or to, we should tether their funding to like this formula, and that formula allowed for I think $2 trillion. So that counterplan relied on textual competition because the functional perm of just like perm do the plan and build the space elevator would have beat it. But that's textually intrinsic because it adds words that aren't in the counterplan or the plan. So when defending textual competition, I think that there's two like good reasons for why textual competition alone is good. First is that it avoids arbitrariness. So kind of the stuff that I was saying above, functional competition is like super judge dependent on like winning whether like a counterplan is competitive. For example, with cross counterplans, you need to win whether like words in the plan are immediate and certain, words in the counterplan are immediate and certain, or with other counterplans like the DOS counterplan, you need to win that like security cooperation is only the DoD. And there's a bunch of like debate on like whether counterplans are competitive. But with textual competition alone, it's like super elegant because all you need to win is like the literal words in the counterplan and the literal words in the plan can't be combined in such a way to like resolve the net benefit. So that's pretty good because it avoids judge intervention, and then you just need to win that judge intervention is bad because it like causes like pandering to judges over actual debating. The second reason why I think that you should stay for why textual competition is good is that it forces you to write better text. So you have like 30 minutes before the round plus infinite prep beforehand to like figure out generic counterplan text. Textual competition forces you to write the best text possible and think about your text in order to like be able to like have your counterplan be competitive. And that's good because it engages more like critical thinking, and it forces you to like think about like the literal like diction you use and like how you like write your text, which is net better for like future success. The last like type of competition, I guess, is textual and functional. So textual and functional is like what you should most probably defend against most counterplans because it limits out the most number of counterplans, so you'll be able to go for competition most. In my opinion, that this is the best type of perm against most counterplans with internal net benefits. Especially it's like useful against well, cross counterplans for one, but also like basically like any other counterplan with internal net benefits. For example, the DOS counterplan, because like the US should do the plan that revives diplomatic credibility. Diplomatic credibility solves existential risk. So you say instead of doing that, the plan should happen, and the DOS should do security assistance over something else, or any counterplan that relies on like one singular action to generate a net benefit is what this perm is good against, because you'll be able to do that action on something else. So this perm, some people call it a limited intrinsic perm. In my opinion, that doesn't really make a lot of sense because like what is limited? So what we call it normally is a textual perm, which is like do the plan and the counterplan over something else, and then make sure that it's actually legitimate. So why is this counterplan good? Or why is this type of competition good? First is that it limits out the most amount of counterplans, and it limits out bad counterplans. It requires both textual and functional competition, which guarantees deficits to the counterplan, because not only will you always have like a functional difference between the counterplan, but you'll also have like a reason for why like the counterplan is germane to the affirmative, and you'll have a reason, and you'll have like an 8-minute defense for why it's good. Second is that neg teams will always try to cheat, so you should always try to limit out like the fringe case scenarios that they have that like aren't textual and functional competition. Third, in my opinion, is the strongest, is that it's a germane test of the plan. So basically, getting rid of internal net benefits means that all net benefits have to be disadds to the app, which basically means that rather than having a bunch of things that just like solve the app and then do some other random thing to like solve some other random action is taken out. So you can always, and then I think it's a pretty compelling case for why that's a bad like model of debate, because then that means that you'll have, as the affirmative, you'll always have 100% of your app basically stolen. You'll have to rely on like made up immediacy or certainty key warrants or like DoD key warrants or something else. And then instead of like a net benefit that you can like have like uniqueness pushes to and like stuff like that, you'll and like stuff that's like about the affirmative, so it's in the literature, you've probably already researched it, you'll have a bunch of like random net benefits that you'll never be able to do, you'll never be able to prepare for because they're unpredictable. There's an incentive to like go towards smaller and smaller net benefits that are less and less prepped, because basically the only way that you can beat these net benefits is by impact turning it, because you probably won't have cards for other things. So it makes it like pretty impossible for the affirmative, because you'll always be like going to like further and further down about stuff that's like not about the affirmative, and it's impossible to do. Second, or the next reason why I think that this model of competition is good is because you can defend that case debate is good. So you'll defend that like debates should be about the affirmative. So rather than, because textual and functional competition gets rid of internal net benefits, that means that net benefits have to be disadds to the affirmative. So that means that you'll always be able to like defend your affirmative against a disad. You'll always have like prep or generic thumpers or like generic no links or stuff like that that you'll be able to go for. And then you'll be able to defend that like AF ground is a good thing. Topic education is a good thing. And then it all becomes like a question about the topic that you'll be able to prepare for and you'll be able to debate. And then the final reason for why I think that this is a pretty good arg is that you'll be able to defend that neg innovation is good. Under textual and functional competition, that gets rid of most like generics that are like recycled throughout the years. It's like Consult Japan, RegNeg, NGA, stuff that can like be recycled throughout like numerous topics and have nothing to do with the affirmative, but rather like have to do with like words that are there in every resolution, like the use of G should, resolved, etc. like that. And then you'll be able to basically go for like process counter plans are recycled every year. And then that's like bad, because we'll never get new education. We'll just like continuously read like old debaters or old coaches blocks, and it's impossible to and the education that we get out of the debate is minimized. So that's the main thing. Does anyone have any questions? Otherwise, I can move on to philosophical and scalar competition. Cool. So philosophical competition is when you're going for a K against a policy app. So basically what it says is that affirmatives must defend this philosophical commitment of the 1AC. So what this means is like if the affirmative has like a hedge advantage and the negative is reading an imperialism K, then they can't go like perm do both, or the affirmative can't say like perm do both, because that would sever out of the philosophical commitments of the 1AC, because it's all about like defending US hedge, defending US empire, etc., etc. Or for example, if you're reading an affirmative that has to do security cooperation with NATO, as all policy affirmatives have to do on this topic, and then you win that like NATO is like a capitalist force, then that means that they can't go perm do both on the cap K, because that'd be severing out of the philosophical commitments of the 1AC that are defended towards, you know, working with a capitalist organization. And same if you like win the USFG as capitalist and stuff like that. So this is good because it basically means that like it gets rid of strong perms like the perm double bind against Ks, and you'll be able to like go for like so if you're neg, you'll be able to like go for stuff that's like you know, the link is like a bit tenuous. If you're affirmative against philosophical competition, I think that what you should say is first, it's impossible to define what like a quote unquote philosophical commitment of the 1AC is. And if it is possible to define what a philosophical commitment of the 1AC is, it's probably going to be a lot of things. It's probably like a worse version of positional competition, because it means that you can get like not only competition off of every word, but you can get like ideas off like the representations of every word in the 1AC or every word in the 1AC document. So it like devolves into like the same criticisms of positional competition, and it makes it probably even worse. Yeah. The next thing is scalar competition. So this is used for like disads against chaos. So scalar competition basically says that we get to test the affirmative at scale. For example, if a K says, or if a KF says like, we think US hegemony is bad, then you get to use like US hedge good as like a disad to the affirmative, and you'll be like, if their method was scaled up, that means that everyone thinks that US hegemony is bad and US hegemony would be like eliminated. So you're going to be able to like defend, or you're going to force them to like stick with US hegemony is bad, and then you'll be able to get a bunch of disads to like model or to their affirmative. This is good because it allows for more ground against chaos, and it means that you'll be able to like rigorously like test everything that the chaos says, which is better for like critical thinking and like refining their method. Um, yeah, I think that's good. I'm gonna stop the recording real quick.